It's funny how life can be a series of little moments that, at the time, seem so insignificant, and then one day, they hit you like a ton of bricks. Looking back, I could have never guessed that a winter trip to a cabin, a snowman my kids were building, and a quiet evening would be the backdrop for everything changing. I wish I had known. I wish I had been more observant, but I suppose that's the curse of loving someone too much. You just don't see things until they're right in front of you. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. We were supposed to be having a fun, relaxing weekend getaway in the snow. Just me, my wife, Emily, and the kids, Sophie, who was 8, and Max, who was 6. We all piled into the car and drove up to the cabin. The idea was simple: make snow angels, sip hot cocoa, and let the kids run wild in the snow while we stayed warm inside. A break from the grind of daily life, a chance to bond as a family. Nothing out of the ordinary. It was supposed to be perfect. But, as with most things in life, perfection is just a myth. As I unpacked our bags in the cozy living room, Sophie and Max were already out the door, their excitement practically bubbling over as they dashed outside to start building the biggest snowman the world had ever seen. Emily, on the other hand, seemed a little distant. I noticed she kept her eyes on her phone more than I would have liked. A few times, she even slipped into the kitchen to make a call, speaking in hushed tones, which made me raise an eyebrow, but I figured it was just work. After all, she was still connected to the world even in the middle of nowhere. We hadn't been able to escape from our routines for too long, and that was clear by the way Emily kept her phone so close, as if she were afraid to miss something. But I didn't say anything. I was just happy to be away from the usual hustle, from the pressure of deadlines and the constant noise. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Dinner came and went, and we all sat around the table eating a simple meal, nothing fancy, just a warm comfort food kind of night. The kids were in a good mood, chattering away about their plans for the next day. Emily seemed to be quiet, more so than usual. I thought maybe she was just tired from the drive, or maybe the work calls were starting to weigh on her. I didn't push it, though. After dinner, I decided to take a walk around the property to clear my head. The crisp winter air was refreshing, and I found myself drawn to the silence. It's amazing how quiet the world can be when there's a blanket of snow over everything. I walked along the path, taking in the serene landscape, but I couldn't stop thinking about Emily's odd behavior. It wasn't just the phone calls. It was the way she'd acted, detached, almost like she was somewhere else. When I got back to the cabin, I was greeted by Sophie and Max running up to me, proudly showing off the snowman they had built. They were covered in snow, their faces red from the cold, and I couldn't help but smile. They had been so focused on their task that they hadn't noticed how late it was getting. I sent them to the bathroom to warm up, and as I did, I found Emily sitting on the couch, phone in hand, looking at a text. I didn't ask who it was from. I just went to the kids' room to help them get into their pajamas. When I returned to the living room, Emily had put her phone down, and everything seemed normal again. But there was this nagging feeling, this instinct deep in my gut that told me that something wasn't right. That night, after the kids fell asleep, Emily and I sat on the couch, our usual routine of talking before bed. But the conversation was strained, like we were both trying to fill the space with words that didn't quite fit. I tried to ignore the unease that had crept into my thoughts, but I couldn't shake it. Something was different, and I didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. The next day, everything seemed to return to normal, or at least as normal as it could be when there's this undercurrent of tension that you can't quite put your finger on. The kids were outside building another snowman, only this time, they decided to make it a family of snowmen, complete with a little snow dog beside them. Emily and I had agreed to take a walk later, but she seemed preoccupied again, slipping away to make a few more calls while I bundled up to join the kids. I couldn't help but feel like she was avoiding me. I chalked it up to her work, figuring maybe she just needed the space. I didn't want to pressure her, especially not while we were supposed to be on this peaceful getaway, but something in the back of my mind kept poking at me, like a soft whisper I couldn't ignore. As I joined the kids outside, the cold air hit me, and I immediately felt more alive. There was something therapeutic about the crunch of snow underfoot, and the way the world seemed to slow down when covered in a blanket of white. We spent the next hour throwing snowballs and laughing at the ridiculous snowman family the kids had created. The only problem was, Emily wasn't there. She didn't come outside to see their little masterpiece, and I couldn't help but feel disappointed. I mean, this was supposed to be a family trip, right? We should all be enjoying it together. Instead, she was in there, somewhere, on her phone, and I was left outside with the kids, pretending everything was fine. After a while, the cold was getting to me, so I ushered the kids inside to warm up. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone still in her hand, staring at the screen with this faraway look in her eyes. I tried to get her attention, talking about how great the snowman looked, how the kids had even given the snow dog a scarf and little snow boots, but she didn't seem to be listening. It was like she was a million miles away, even though she was sitting right there. I could feel the frustration bubbling up inside me, and I tried to push it down, but it wasn't easy. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the stress of work or maybe the isolation of the cabin, but it was starting to feel like something more. That afternoon, I decided to take the kids sledding down the little hill behind the cabin. They were all about the thrills, their excitement infectious as they laughed and zoomed down the hill, shouting for me to join them. I didn't want to leave Emily behind, but I figured it might be good for her to have some space. I didn't realize just how much space she needed until we got back to the cabin, exhausted from the fun and ready for some hot cocoa. When we returned, the cabin was quiet, too quiet. I found Emily sitting in the same spot, only now, she was texting someone, not even pretending to be involved in the family stuff anymore. I tried to ignore the feeling of unease creeping up on me. She was just working. She had to be. That's what I told myself, even as the pit in my stomach grew. When the kids went to bed later that night, I decided to confront her. I knew it wasn't the best time, especially since we were supposed to be relaxing, but I couldn't keep ignoring the way she was pulling away from me. We sat on the couch again, and I asked her what was going on. At first, she just shrugged it off, telling me she was just tired and that everything was fine. But I could tell it wasn't fine. There was a defensiveness in her tone, a little too much avoidance in her eyes. I didn't want to press her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling me. I tried to remain calm, to keep the conversation light, but she was so distant, like a part of her was already gone. It wasn't until she stood up to go to the kitchen that I saw it. Her phone, sitting on the couch, face down. I knew it was wrong, but the temptation to just take a glance was too much. I told myself it would only be for a second, just to get a better sense of what was going on. I picked it up, and as soon as I unlocked it, there it was, an unread message from someone named D. My heart sank as I read it. I can't wait to see you again. I miss you so much. I felt like the world had tilted beneath my feet. This was real. This wasn't some work stress or a bad mood. She was having an affair. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, holding her phone in my hands, the words blurring together as I tried to make sense of it. But there was no sense to be made. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted for years, was betraying me, and I didn't even see it coming. When she came back into the room, she saw the phone in my hands. The panic in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She tried to explain, but the words didn't come out right. She was caught, and the truth hung in the air between us like a heavy, suffocating cloud. I didn't know what to say or how to react, but one thing was clear. Everything I thought I knew about my life had just come crashing down. The next few minutes felt like a blur. Emily's face, the panic, the way she stammered trying to explain herself, it was all too much. I didn't know whether to scream or just sit there, numb. I put her phone down on the table, the words from D still echoing in my head. It wasn't just the affair that was eating me up, it was the realization that I had missed all the signs. For months, I'd noticed her pulling away, her long hours, her excuses about work trips, but I had brushed them off. I wanted to believe that everything was fine. I wanted to believe that this was just a rough patch, that we were going through the motions and it would pass. But it hadn't passed. It had been building, quietly, behind closed doors, and I had been too blind to see it. Emily sat across from me, her eyes red as she tried to speak, her hands shaking as she reached for mine. "Michael, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I never meant for this to happen." I could hear the guilt in her words, but I couldn't bring myself to care. My mind was swirling, my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to make sense of it. I had so many questions, but none of them mattered. None of it mattered anymore. Everything we had built, everything I had thought was solid, was now shattered, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I stood up suddenly, pacing across the room, trying to clear my head. The kids were asleep in the next room, blissfully unaware of the storm that was unfolding just on the other side of the walls. It was like the world had stopped, leaving me suspended in this endless moment of disbelief. Emily stayed where she was, watching me with wide, guilty eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to face her right then. I wasn't angry, not yet, but the hurt was so overwhelming, so all-consuming, that I didn't know how to channel it. After what felt like hours of silence, I finally spoke, my voice low and cold. "How long has this been going on, Emily?" She flinched, the question hanging in the air like a weight neither of us wanted to carry. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Finally, she let out a shaky breath and whispered, "A few months." "I didn't mean for it to happen, Michael. It just did. I'm so sorry. A few months." The words hit me harder than I expected, like a punch to the gut. How could she? How could she betray me like this, especially after everything we had been through? We had built a life together, 2 kids, a home, years of memories, and she had thrown it all away for some secret affair. My mind couldn't process it all, couldn't make sense of how someone could make such a choice. But there she was, sitting in front of me, apologizing, and I couldn't even look at her anymore. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had married, was gone. In her place was a stranger, someone who had taken a piece of me that I would never get back. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper, but it felt like I was shouting. She hesitated for a moment, and I could see her struggling with the truth, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. "His name is Derek," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "He's from work. He's been there for me in ways I don't know. It was stupid. It was wrong. I didn't want to hurt you, Michael." Derek. I didn't know the name, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he had taken my place. He had been there when I wasn't, and I hated him for it, even though I knew it wasn't his fault. It wasn't just him, it was her. It was Emily. She had made the choice to go down this path. She had chosen him over me. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to hold myself together, but everything felt like it was falling apart. "How long?" I asked again, needing to know the full extent of the betrayal. Emily bit her lip, her eyes brimming with tears as she looked down at her hands. "It started a few months ago. It wasn't planned, Michael. It just happened. I don't know how to explain it. A few months ago." That was around the time she had started getting distant, when the late nights at work became more frequent, when her attention seemed to wander, even when we were together. I should have noticed. I should have seen the signs, but I had been too busy, too caught up in my own routine, to see what was happening right in front of me. And now, here we were, in a cabin that was supposed to be a getaway, a retreat from the chaos of life, and instead, it was the place where everything had come crashing down. I felt a wave of exhaustion hit me, a deep, bone-weary kind of tired that made me want to curl up and shut the world out. But I couldn't. I couldn't ignore this, couldn't pretend it didn't matter. Because it did matter. It mattered more than anything. This wasn't just a mistake, a one-time lapse in judgment. This was a betrayal, something that could never be undone. And I had no idea where we went from here. The silence between us was thick, heavy with unspoken words. Emily didn't try to apologize again. She knew it wouldn't help. We both knew it. She had shattered the trust we'd spent years building, and nothing could fix that. So we sat there, the space between us growing wider with every passing second, the weight of the truth settling over us like a suffocating fog. I wasn't sure how we would move forward, or if we even could, but I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't stay here, not like this. I had to get out, to think, to process, to figure out what I wanted, if I even wanted anything to do with this marriage anymore. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and without a word, I walked out of the cabin, leaving Emily sitting there in the dim light, alone with her guilt. I walked out of the cabin into the cold night air, not caring about the chill that bit at my skin. It felt like a lifeline, the biting cold of winter reminding me that I was still alive, that I could still feel something. I didn't know where I was going. My feet just carried me, away from the place that was once a home, away from the woman I thought I knew, from the life we had built together. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was floating above everything, watching myself go through the motions without any real control over what I was doing. The snow crunched beneath my boots, the world around me blanketed in white, but inside, everything was dark, frozen in place, like a glacier had settled into my chest. I wandered for what felt like hours, my mind racing, trying to process everything Emily had said, trying to understand how we had gotten here. But there was no logic to it, no clear explanation that could make sense of her betrayal. It was a mess of emotions, anger, sadness, confusion, all tangled together in a knot that I couldn't undo. Every step I took away from the cabin felt like a step away from everything I had ever known. The life I thought was solid, The love I thought was real was all a lie. I couldn't shake the image of her sitting there, telling me she was sorry, her face full of guilt, but it didn't matter. She had done it. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and I was left standing here, trying to pick up the pieces of a life that was now shattered beyond repair. Eventually, I found myself at the edge of the property, looking out over the snow-covered landscape, the stillness of the night pressing in around me. The kids were inside, safe and warm, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just hit their parents' world. I felt a pang of guilt for them, for what they would have to face when everything came crashing down. But there was nothing I could do about that now. I had to focus on myself for once. I needed to figure out what I wanted, what I needed. Because right now, I was a mess. I didn't know who I was anymore, didn't know what my life even meant without Emily beside me. The minutes stretched into hours, and I didn't realize how late it had gotten until the lights from the cabin flickered on in the distance, a reminder that I couldn't run away forever. I could feel Emily's presence in the house, even from here. I had been avoiding the truth for so long, pretending that everything was fine, that our marriage was strong, but it had all been an illusion. She had broken my trust, and no matter how much she apologized, it would never be the same. My heart was heavy with the weight of it, the weight of knowing that I had given everything to someone who had turned her back on me when things got hard. But it wasn't just her. It was me too. I had allowed it to happen. I had ignored the signs, buried my doubts, and now, here I was, standing in the middle of nowhere with no idea where to go from here. As I made my way back to the cabin, I realized I didn't want to go back in. I didn't want to face her, to have that conversation that I knew would come, the one where we decided what to do next, whether we would try to fix things or whether this was the end. I didn't have answers, and I wasn't sure if I even wanted them. I just knew that I couldn't keep living in this limbo, this space between what was and what could have been. I needed to figure it out. I needed space. I found myself walking down the path toward the small creek that ran along the edge of the property, the water frozen over, but still flowing beneath the ice. The sound of the water beneath the surface was soothing, and I found myself sitting down on a large rock, staring out at the dark expanse before me. The weight of everything, Emily's betrayal, the lies, the broken trust, it all felt too much to carry. I needed to let it out, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt like all the emotion was locked up inside me, like I was holding on to it for fear that if I let go, I wouldn't be able to stop. The night was quiet, too quiet, and it gave me too much time to think. I thought about the life I had with Emily, the way we met, the years we spent together, building our family, our home. But all of that seemed so far away now, like it belonged to someone else. I wondered if it had ever really been what I thought it was. Or had I just been too naive to see the cracks forming in the walls? Had we really been as happy as I thought? Or had I just ignored the signs because I didn't want to face the reality? The questions swirled around in my head, but there were no answers. Just silence. I looked up at the sky, the stars so clear against the dark expanse, and for a brief moment, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was the cold, the isolation, or just the need for something to make sense of it all, but I knew I had to go back. I couldn't keep running. I had to face Emily, face the truth of what had happened, and figure out what came next. As much as I hated it, I knew I couldn't just leave. I had to confront her, and figure out how to move on, whether we stayed together or whether we went our separate ways. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the not knowing. I stood up from the rock, the cold creeping through my clothes, and made my way back to the cabin. I didn't know what I was going to say or how I was going to say it, but I knew I had to go back. I couldn't let this be the end of everything. Not yet. Not until I knew if there was a way to salvage what was left of us. I walked back to the cabin, each step heavier than the last, my mind spinning with everything that had happened, with everything that had been said. As I neared the door, I could see the warm glow of the lights through the window, the kids' laughter faintly audible in the background as they whispered secrets in the bedroom. I knew Emily was still inside, probably sitting in the same spot, waiting for me to come back and, I suppose, ready to try to explain herself again. Part of me wanted to turn around, to leave, to disappear into the night, and let everything fall apart without having to face it. But I couldn't. I couldn't keep running. I had to face this. I had to face her. I opened the door slowly, almost hesitantly, as if waiting for something to stop me, something to make me turn back. But when I stepped inside, everything was quiet. The kids had already fallen asleep, and Emily was sitting on the couch, looking as lost and broken as I felt. There was a stillness in the air, a palpable tension that hung between us, like we were both afraid to speak, afraid to acknowledge the elephant in the room. I could see the apology in her eyes, but it wasn't enough. Apologies weren't going to fix this. Not this time. I stood there for a moment, just watching her, unsure of what to say. Finally, I broke the silence, my voice rough. "What now, Emily?" She looked up at me, her face pale, the tears still fresh on her cheeks, and for a moment, I saw the woman I married. The woman who had promised me everything. But that image was fading fast, replaced by the woman sitting before me, a stranger who had broken everything we had. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what to say, Michael. I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't want to hear it." The words didn't matter anymore. I had heard them all before, all the excuses, all the justifications. I wasn't interested in hearing why she had done it. What I needed to know was what we were going to do about it. But that was the problem, wasn't it? I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know if I could even look at her the same way again, if I could ever trust her with my heart, with my life. The foundation of everything we had built together had been ripped out from under me, and now we were left standing in the wreckage, unsure of how to rebuild, if we even could. I sat down on the other side of the room, avoiding eye contact, not knowing where to even begin. My mind was numb, my emotions all tangled up in a mess I couldn't untangle. I had thought I knew everything about Emily, about us. I had thought we were happy, that we were a team. But now I felt like I had been living in a lie. I wasn't sure what was real anymore. "I don't know if I can do this," I finally said, the words tumbling out before I had a chance to stop them. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if we can fix this." Emily's face crumpled, and I saw the guilt, the regret, and the fear of losing everything she had built with me. But it didn't change the fact that what she had done was unforgivable. The damage had already been done, and no amount of apologies or explanations would ever change that. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't even deserve a second chance. But I love you, Michael. I've always loved you. I know that doesn't make up for what I've done, but I'm begging you to at least try. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right." I shook my head, unable to meet her gaze. "I don't know if I can believe that anymore, Emily. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." The words stung, and I hated that they came out so harsh, but they were the truth. Trust, once broken, was like shattered glass. No matter how carefully you tried to put it back together, there would always be cracks, always be pieces missing. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. Emily didn't try to say anything else. She just sat there, looking at me with those eyes full of regret, waiting for me to make some decision, some choice. But I didn't have one. I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that everything I thought I knew about our marriage was now in question, and I didn't know if I could find my way back to her. I stood up suddenly, feeling the need to move, to break the tension, to do something. "I need to clear my head," I muttered, more to myself than to her. I can't be here right now." Without waiting for a response, I walked out of the room, feeling her eyes on my back as I left. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I stepped outside, the cold air hitting my face like a shock. It was like I had to step out into the world, away from the suffocating quiet of the cabin, to figure out what came next. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know if I could ever look at Emily the same way again, if we could ever move past this, or if this was the end of our story. All I knew was that I couldn't make a decision right now. I couldn't face the reality of what had happened, not until I had some time to think, to breathe, to process everything. So I walked into the night, the snow crunching beneath my feet, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself feel everything, the anger, the hurt, the betrayal, but also the uncertainty of what tomorrow would bring. Because, for all I knew, tomorrow could be the day that everything finally came crashing down. Or it could be the first day of a new beginning, but I wasn't ready to decide yet. Not tonight. Not when I still didn't know what I was truly feeling.